Have you ever thought about why the moment someone becomes too available, too present, too eager to please you, they somehow lose their magic? Have you ever noticed how the friend who's always there starts to feel invisible, while the one who disappears for months suddenly becomes fascinating again? This isn't cruelty. This isn't some psychological game we consciously play. This is human nature operating at its deepest level, and today, we're going to explore one of the most counterintuitive truths about power, influence, and human relationships. This video will change how you see every interaction you have, every relationship you build, and every move you make in the game of life. Because what I'm about to tell you sounds completely wrong on the surface, yet it's been proven true for thousands of years across every culture, every empire, and every human society that has ever existed. The truth is this: presence diminishes value, and absence increases it. The more you are seen, the more common you become. The scarcer you make yourself, the more valuable you appear. This is Law 16 from the 48 Laws of Power: use absence to increase respect and honor. And before you dismiss this as manipulation or some dark Machiavellian trick, understand that this principle is already operating in your life right now, whether you realize it or not. It's why you check your phone obsessively when someone doesn't text back. It's why companies create limited edition products. It's why celebrities carefully control their public appearances. It's why the boss who's always available somehow commands less respect than the one whose time is impossible to get. But here's what makes this law truly dangerous and truly powerful: most people get it backwards. They think that being present, being helpful, being constantly available will make them indispensable. They believe that the more they give, the more they'll be valued. And they're wrong. Dead wrong. In fact, they're programming people to take them for granted, to devalue their time, and to lose respect for their boundaries. So let me ask you, are you too available? Are you too present? Are you making yourself too common? Because if you are, you're violating one of the fundamental laws of human psychology, and you're paying the price whether you know it or not. Let's start with the most basic truth about human psychology: we don't value what we have constant access to. Think about air. You breathe it every second of every day. It's literally keeping you alive right now. But do you think about it? Do you appreciate it? Do you value it? No. Not until it's taken away. Not until you're underwater holding your breath, or you're choking, or you're at high altitude struggling to catch your breath. Then, suddenly, air becomes the most precious thing in the world. This is the scarcity principle, and it governs almost everything about how we assign value. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon extensively. They call it the scarcity effect, and it works on everything from products to people to opportunities. In one famous study, researchers gave people the exact same cookie from the exact same batch. But they told one group the cookies were abundant and plentiful, while they told the other group the cookies were rare and almost gone. The people who thought the cookies were scarce rated them as significantly more delicious, more valuable, and more desirable. Same cookie. Different perception of scarcity. Different value assigned. This isn't rational. This isn't logical. But it's deeply human. Our brains evolved in environments where scarcity was real. Food was scarce. Water was scarce. Safety was scarce. Mates were scarce. So our ancestors who paid attention to scarcity, who valued what was rare, who pursued what was hard to get, they survived better. They reproduced more. And they passed down their psychological wiring to us. We are the descendants of people who were hardwired to value scarcity, and that wiring still controls us today. Now, let's apply this to human relationships and social dynamics. When you first meet someone interesting, someone charismatic, someone powerful, they have value precisely because you don't have full access to them yet. They're new. They're unknown. They're scarce in your life. There's mystery. There's anticipation. There's desire to know more, to get closer, to win their attention. This is why first impressions matter so much. This is why the early stages of friendships and relationships feel electric. The other person is still scarce to you. But what happens over time? If that person becomes constantly available, always around, always eager to help, always responding immediately, always accommodating your schedule, what happens to their value in your mind? It drops. Not because they've changed. Not because they're less interesting or less valuable as a person. But because they're no longer scarce. They've become common. They've become predictable. They've become, in the language of economics, oversupplied. And here's the cruel irony, the person who's making themselves constantly available is usually doing it because they care. They're being kind. They're being generous with their time and attention. They're trying to be a good friend, a good partner, a good colleague. But the psychological effect on the other person is the opposite of what they intend. Instead of increasing affection and respect, constant availability decreases it. Instead of becoming more valued, they become taken for granted. Let me give you a historical example that perfectly illustrates this principle. In the 16th century, there was a French general named Guillaume de Bellay. He was brilliant, capable, and highly valued by King Francis I. The king relied on him heavily for military strategy and diplomatic missions. But Guillaume made a critical error. He made himself too available. He was always at court. Always ready to serve. Always present. Always eager to help. And over time, something strange happened. The king started to value him less. Started to consult him less. Started to take his presence for granted. Guillaume's brother, Jean de Bellay, noticed this and gave him advice that would change everything. Jean told him, disappear for a while. Make yourself scarce. Let the king feel your absence. Guillaume was reluctant. He thought disappearing would make him forgotten. But he trusted his brother and left court for several months. And what happened? The king suddenly remembered Guillaume's value. He realized how much he relied on him. He started asking where Guillaume was. He started missing his counsel. And when Guillaume finally returned, his value had skyrocketed. The king treated him with new respect, new honor, new appreciation. Guillaume's absence had done what his constant presence could never do, it made him valuable again. This same pattern plays out in modern corporations every single day. Think about the employee who's always at their desk, always available, always staying late, always saying yes to every request. What happens to that person? Do they get promoted rapidly? Do they get showered with raises and recognition? Usually not. Why? Because they've made themselves too available. They've signaled that their time isn't valuable. They've trained everyone around them to take them for granted. Meanwhile, the employee who carefully guards their time, who says no strategically, who isn't always immediately available, who creates a sense that their time and attention are precious resources, that person often advances faster. It seems unfair. It seems backwards. But it's how human psychology works. Look at Apple. Look at how they release products. They don't flood the market. They don't make everything immediately available to everyone. They create scarcity. They create waiting lists. They create the sense that their products are rare and precious. When a new iPhone launches, you can't just walk into any store and buy one immediately. You have to wait. You have to compete for it. And what does this do? It increases desire. It increases perceived value. It makes people want the product more, not less. Now compare this to a company that oversaturates the market with their product. That makes it available everywhere, all the time, with no sense of scarcity or exclusivity. What happens? The product becomes common. It loses its allure. It loses its premium status. Same quality of product potentially, but different perception of value based entirely on availability. This principle extends to every domain of human life. Think about the friend who texts you 10 times a day, who always wants to hang out, who's always available whenever you call. How do you feel about that person compared to the friend who's selective about their time, who you only see occasionally, who has a full life and busy schedule? Be honest. The second friend probably feels more valuable to you. You probably prioritize time with them more. you probably respect their time more. Not because they're necessarily better friends, but because they're scarcer. Think about dating. Why does playing hard to get work? It shouldn't work. It seems manipulative. It seems like game playing. But it works because it creates scarcity. When someone's too eager, too available, too quick to respond, too willing to drop everything for you, what happens? The attraction often fades. The desire decreases. But when someone's mysterious, when they have their own life, when they're not always available, when there's uncertainty about their interest, desire increases. Your brain interprets their scarcity as value. Now, I want to be very clear about something before we go deeper. This isn't about being manipulative or playing cruel games with people's emotions. This isn't about deliberately hurting people or being unnecessarily distant. This is about understanding a fundamental truth of human psychology so you can navigate relationships and power dynamics more effectively. Because whether you like it or not, this dynamic is operating in your life right now. The question is whether you're aware of it and using it wisely, or whether you're ignorant of it and suffering the consequences. Let me share another historical example that shows the dark side of violating this law. There was once a court jester who was extraordinarily talented and entertaining. The king loved him. The court loved him. He was always in demand. And he loved the attention so much that he made himself constantly available. He performed all the time. He was at every gathering, every feast, every event. He never said no. He never took a break. And what happened? People got tired of him. His jokes became predictable. His presence became expected rather than special. And eventually, the king grew bored with him and replaced him with a new jester who was fresh and novel precisely because he was new and scarce. The original jester had violated Law 16. He had made himself too present, too available, too common. And he paid the price. Had he been strategic, had he performed selectively, had he created anticipation by occasionally being absent, he could have maintained his value indefinitely. But by oversupplying himself, he destroyed his own market value. This connects to a deeper principle in economics called the law of supply and demand. When supply goes up and demand stays constant, price goes down. When supply is restricted and demand stays constant or increases, price goes up. This applies to products, to services, to commodities, and yes, to people. Your time, your attention, your presence, your skills, these are all products in a marketplace. And if you oversupply them, if you make them too readily available, their value drops. If you create scarcity, if you make them harder to access, their value rises. Steve Jobs understood this intuitively. He was famous for being highly selective about his appearances and his time. He didn't do many interviews. He didn't attend many conferences. When he did appear, it was an event. People paid attention. People valued those moments. Compare this to a CEO who's constantly on television, constantly giving interviews, constantly seeking attention. Over time, people start to tune them out. They become noise. They lose the power of their voice precisely because they use it too much. Think about the concept of a guru or a spiritual teacher who lives on a mountain or in a remote monastery. Why do people trek for days or weeks to see them? Why do they value the wisdom of someone who's deliberately removed themselves from society? Partly it's because the journey itself creates value. But partly it's because scarcity increases perceived wisdom. A teacher who's available on every street corner, who will teach anyone anytime, somehow seems less wise than the one who's selective, who's hard to access, who only accepts certain students. This might seem cynical, but it's been true throughout human history. Moses went up the mountain alone to receive the 10 Commandments. Jesus went into the desert for 40 days. Buddha sat under the tree in isolation. Muhammad retreated to the cave. Every major spiritual figure in history has used strategic absence as part of their power. They didn't make themselves constantly available. They withdrew. They created mystery. They created scarcity. And it increased their influence dramatically. Now let's talk about the modern workplace and how this law operates in professional settings. Think about the difference between a manager who has an open-door policy where anyone can interrupt them anytime, versus a manager whose time is carefully guarded, who you need to schedule in advance to see, whose meetings are time-limited and focused. Which manager commands more respect? Be honest. Usually, it's the second one. Why? Because their time is scarce, and scarcity signals value. This doesn't mean you should be unnecessarily difficult or unapproachable. That's not the point. The point is to be strategic about your availability. To set boundaries that communicate that your time is valuable. To create the sense that access to you is a privilege, not a right. When you do this, people respect your time more. They come to you more prepared. They value the time they get with you. They take you more seriously. Google and many tech companies actually studied this phenomenon. They found that executives who were most generous with their time were often least respected. Meanwhile, executives who carefully guarded their calendars and made people work to get on their schedule were perceived as more important and more valuable. This isn't fair or logical, but it's human nature. Scarcity creates value perception, even when the scarce thing is just someone's calendar availability. Let's talk about content creators and influencers, because this is where Law 16 is playing out in real time on a massive scale. Think about influencers who post constantly, multiple times per day, always available, always responding, always creating content. What tends to happen to them over time? Often, their engagement drops. People start to scroll past their content. They become background noise. Compare this to creators who post selectively, who create anticipation, who make each piece of content feel like an event. They often maintain higher engagement and higher perceived value. This is why limited series shows often have more cultural impact than long-running shows that drag on for years. Breaking Bad had 5 seasons and ended. Game of Thrones, before its controversial ending, created massive anticipation by having limited episodes per season and long breaks between seasons. Compare this to shows that run for 10 or 15 seasons. Eventually, people stop caring. The show becomes common, predictable, taken for granted. Quality might still be high, but perceived value drops because of oversupply. Musicians understand this too. Some artists release an album every year and wonder why nobody cares anymore. Others release an album every 3 or 4 years and create massive anticipation and cultural moments. Beyoncé famously surprise-dropped albums after long periods of relative quiet, and each became a massive event. She understands scarcity. She understands the power of absence. She doesn't oversaturate the market with her presence. Now, let's explore the psychological mechanism behind why absence works. It's not just about scarcity. It's about what happens in people's minds when you're not there. When someone is constantly present, people think about them in real time based on current interactions. But when someone is absent, something fascinating happens. Memory and imagination take over. And memory and imagination are almost always more generous than reality. When you're absent, people remember the best of you. They forget your flaws. They romanticize your qualities. They fill in gaps with positive assumptions. They start to miss you. They start to wonder about you. They start to appreciate what you brought that's now missing. This is why breakups often involve one person suddenly wanting back what they took for granted when they had it. Absence activated their imagination and memory, and suddenly the person seems more valuable than they did when they were present. This is also why historical figures often seem greater than contemporary ones. Time and absence have filtered out the mundane, leaving only the highlights. Washington, Lincoln, Churchill, these figures seem larger than life partly because we're separated from them by time and absence. We remember their greatest moments and forget their daily struggles and failures. Meanwhile, current leaders are seen in real time with all their flaws visible, and they seem smaller as a result. There's a famous experiment in psychology where researchers asked people to rate their partner's attractiveness and other qualities. They found that people who saw their partners every day rated them lower on average than people in long-distance relationships who only saw their partners occasionally. Why? Because absence activates idealization. When someone's not in front of you constantly, your mind creates an improved version of them. You remember the highlights. You minimize the negatives. You fill gaps with positive projections. This is uncomfortable to acknowledge, but it's true. Constant presence allows people to see all your flaws, all your mundane moments, all your ordinary humanity. Strategic absence allows them to imagine your best self and remember your highlights. This isn't about being fake or hiding who you are. It's about understanding that humans are better at appreciating what's not constantly in front of them. Let's talk about the dark side of this law, because there is one. The danger is that some people learn this principle and use it manipulatively. They play games. They deliberately create false scarcity. They withdraw not for strategic reasons but to punish or control others. They use absence as a weapon rather than as a tool for maintaining value. This is where Law 16 crosses from wisdom into manipulation. The difference is intent and authenticity. Strategic absence based on genuinely valuing your own time and having a full life is healthy. Fake absence designed to manipulate someone else's emotions is toxic. If you're pulling away from someone just to make them chase you, just to feel power over them, just to hurt them, that's not strategic, that's cruel. The healthy application of Law 16 comes from genuinely having other priorities, other interests, other demands on your time. It comes from legitimate self-respect and boundary setting, not from game playing. There's also a risk of taking this too far. If you become so absent, so scarce, so removed that people forget about you entirely or lose the ability to connect with you, you've violated the law in the opposite direction. The goal is strategic moderation. Enough presence to maintain connection and demonstrate value, enough absence to create scarcity and appreciation. Too much of either is destructive. Think about brands that tried to be too exclusive and priced themselves out of the market entirely. They became so scarce, so inaccessible, that they lost relevance. Meanwhile, brands that became too common lost their premium appeal. The sweet spot is in the middle, accessible enough to maintain presence, scarce enough to maintain value. This is why luxury brands carefully control their distribution. They want to be available enough to make money, but scarce enough to maintain exclusivity. Let me give you a modern example of someone who mastered Law 16, Elon Musk, for better or worse. Before he bought Twitter and became extremely present online, he was much more selective about his public appearances and statements. Each tweet was an event. Each interview was anticipated. Each product launch was mythologized. He created massive value through strategic scarcity of his attention and presence. Whether you like him or not, his strategic use of absence created enormous power and influence. Compare that to CEOs who are constantly on CNBC, constantly tweeting, constantly seeking attention and validation. Over time, people tune them out. They become predictable. Their statements lose impact. They've oversupplied themselves, and the market has adjusted their value accordingly. Now let's talk about how to actually apply Law 16 in your own life without being manipulative or cruel. First principle, genuinely fill your life with things that matter to you. When you have real interests, real projects, real relationships, real goals that demand your time and attention, you don't have to fake scarcity. You naturally become more selective about how you spend your time. This is the healthy foundation of Law 16. You're not playing hard to get, you actually have things to do that are important to you. Second principle, set boundaries and communicate them clearly. If you're not available at certain times, say so. If you need time to focus on important work, block off your calendar. If you can't respond to messages immediately, don't. This isn't being rude, it's being respectful of your own time and priorities. And when you respect your own time, others learn to respect it too. Third principle, when you are present, be fully present. This is crucial. The power of strategic absence is amplified when your presence is high quality. If people know that when they do get your time and attention, they get the best of you, they'll value that time more. But if your presence is half-hearted and distracted, your absence won't create the same longing and appreciation. Fourth principle, vary your patterns. Don't be completely predictable. Sometimes be available, sometimes be scarce. Sometimes respond quickly, sometimes take your time. When you're too predictable, people figure out the pattern and adjust. Variability maintains interest and attention. This is actually a principle from behavioral psychology called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful ways to maintain someone's interest and engagement. Fifth principle, use absence to reset relationships that have become imbalanced. If you feel taken for granted, if you feel like you're always the one reaching out, always the one making effort, always the one being accommodating, strategic absence can reset the dynamic. Pull back. Focus on yourself. Let the other person feel your absence. If they value you, they'll notice and make more effort. If they don't notice or care, you've learned something valuable about that relationship. Let's explore some specific scenarios where Law 16 applies powerfully. In romantic relationships, the person who's less available often has more power in the dynamic. This creates an imbalance that's not necessarily healthy, but it's true. If you're always available, always accommodating, always flexible, you signal that your time isn't valuable. You train the other person to not prioritize you. Meanwhile, if you have your own life, your own friends, your own interests, your own schedule, you signal that access to you is valuable. This often creates more attraction and more respect. The key is authenticity. Don't fake being busy. Actually be busy with things you care about. Don't play games. Actually have boundaries because you value your time and your life. When your scarcity comes from genuine self-respect and a full life rather than from manipulation, it's attractive rather than toxic. In friendships, the friend who's always available for everyone often becomes the friend everyone takes for granted. Meanwhile, the friend who's selective about their time, who can't always drop everything, who has other priorities, often gets more appreciation when they do show up. This isn't about being a bad friend. It's about being a friend who values their own life and time, which actually makes you a better friend because you're not resentful or depleted. In the workplace, as we discussed, strategic unavailability signals importance. The employee who's always in the office, always available for every meeting, always saying yes, often gets passed over. Meanwhile, the employee who guards their time, who's selective about commitments, who makes their availability valuable, often advances faster. Again, this isn't about being difficult. It's about setting boundaries that communicate self-respect and value. In sales and negotiation, scarcity is one of the most powerful tools. Limited time offer works because it creates urgency through scarcity. Only 3 spots left works because it signals that the opportunity is scarce and valuable. This price is only available until Friday works because it creates a deadline that forces decision-making. Scarcity closes deals. Abundance delays decisions. Smart salespeople understand this and use it ethically. They're honest about their availability and capacity. They don't fake scarcity, but they communicate real limitations clearly. I only take on 3 clients per quarter is a powerful statement if it's true. It signals that your services are valuable and in demand. It also attracts better clients who respect your boundaries. Let's talk about social media and the digital age, because this is where many people violate Law 16 constantly. The person who's always posting, always sharing, always commenting, always online, becomes background noise. Their updates get scrolled past. Their opinions get ignored. They've oversupplied themselves. Meanwhile, the person who posts selectively, who creates quality content occasionally, who isn't always present, often gets more engagement and attention when they do appear. This is hard because social media rewards frequency in the short term. Algorithms often favor accounts that post daily or multiple times per day. But in the long term, oversaturation leads to audience fatigue. People start to mute you, unfollow you, or just ignore your content. The most successful long-term strategy is usually quality over quantity, which naturally creates more scarcity. Think about how you consume social media. Whose posts do you actually pay attention to? Usually, it's people who post selectively and thoughtfully rather than constantly. The person who posts 10 times a day becomes noise. The person who posts once a week with something meaningful becomes signal. This is Law 16 operating in the digital age. Now let's address a critical question. Doesn't this law contradict other advice about being reliable, being present, being available to the people who need you? How do you balance strategic absence with being a good person, a good friend, a good partner? This is where wisdom and judgment come in. Law 16 isn't about being absent from important moments. It's not about being unreliable or abandoning people who need you. It's about not being so constantly available that you lose value and get taken for granted. You can absolutely be there for people in important moments while still maintaining boundaries around your time and attention in general. You can be fully present when it matters while not being constantly present every moment. You can be reliable for the things that matter while not saying yes to everything. The key is discernment. Be scarce with your general availability but present for what truly matters. Think of it this way: if you're available for everything, you're really available for nothing. You spread yourself so thin that even when you show up, you're depleted and half present. But if you guard your energy and time carefully, when you do show up, you can be fully present and fully valuable. Quality of presence matters more than quantity. Let's explore the concept of value creation through absence in more depth. When you withdraw strategically, you create several psychological effects simultaneously. First, you create a void. Something that was there is now missing. Humans are wired to notice absences and changes more than consistent presences. When something disappears from our environment, we notice. This grabs attention. Second, you trigger loss aversion. Humans hate losing things more than we enjoy gaining things. This is a well-documented cognitive bias. When you're constantly present, people don't fear losing you. But when you pull back, they suddenly face potential loss, and it activates their desire to prevent that loss. This is why people often pursue most aggressively what's pulling away from them. Third, you activate imagination. When someone's not in front of us, our minds fill in the blanks. We wonder what they're doing. We imagine where they are. We create narratives. And human imagination almost always creates more interesting stories than mundane reality. Your absence lets people imagine you as more interesting, more valuable, more desirable than constant presence would allow. Fourth, you create competition. When you're scarce, other people start to compete for your time and attention. This increases your perceived value. It's social proof in action. If other people want something, we assume it must be valuable. If you're always available to everyone, there's no competition, no social proof, no signal of value. Fifth, you allow people to miss you. Missing someone is actually a form of appreciation. It's recognizing that your life is better with them in it than without them. But you can't miss someone who's always there. Absence is necessary for missing, and missing is necessary for deep appreciation. All of these psychological mechanisms are working simultaneously when you practice strategic absence. This is why it's so powerful. It's not just one trick, it's activating multiple aspects of human psychology at once. Now, I want to address something important. Some people will hear this law and think it's manipulative, dark, cynical. They'll say authentic relationships shouldn't involve this kind of strategic thinking. And I understand that reaction. But here's the reality: these dynamics are operating whether you're aware of them or not. Being ignorant of them doesn't make you more authentic, it just makes you less effective and often less happy. Understanding these laws doesn't mean you have to be manipulative. It means you understand how human psychology works so you can navigate relationships and power dynamics consciously rather than unconsciously. You can use this understanding ethically. You can use it to set healthy boundaries. You can use it to maintain your value and self-respect. You don't have to use it to hurt people. In fact, understanding Law 16 can actually make you a better person in relationships because you're not constantly available in a way that breeds resentment. You're not constantly giving in a way that depletes you. You're not constantly accommodating in a way that makes you invisible. You maintain your sense of self, your boundaries, your value. And that actually makes you more capable of genuine connection when you do engage. let's talk about timing and knowing when to apply Law 16. This law is most powerful in the following situations: when you've been too available and feel taken for granted, when someone is losing interest or respect, when you need to reset a power dynamic, when you're entering a new relationship or situation and want to establish your value, when you feel yourself becoming background noise in someone's life. The law is less relevant when you're building initial trust in a new relationship, someone genuinely needs you in a crisis, you're establishing reliability and credibility, you're in a phase where presence matters more than scarcity. Wisdom is knowing which situation you're in and acting accordingly. Early in relationships, presence builds trust. Once trust is established, strategic absence maintains value. In crisis moments, presence demonstrates loyalty. In everyday life, boundaries maintain respect. The key is flexibility and awareness. There's a concept in Eastern philosophy called Wu Wei, which roughly translates to effortless action or acting in accordance with natural flows. The highest application of Law 16 looks like Wu Wei. It doesn't feel forced or strategic. It flows from genuine self-respect, genuine priorities, genuine boundaries. When you're truly living a full life that you value, strategic absence happens naturally. You don't have to think about it or force it. You're simply honoring yourself and your time. Let me share one final historical example that brings all of this together. Napoleon Bonaparte understood Law 16 instinctively. When he returned from exile in Elba, he could have stayed and tried to rebuild from a position of constant visibility. Instead, he disappeared from public view for exactly 100 days before making his move. During that absence, nostalgia grew. Dissatisfaction with the current regime grew. Memory of his leadership was filtered through time and absence, making it seem better than it was. When he finally reappeared, people were ready to follow him again. His strategic absence had rebuilt his value. Of course, Napoleon's story ended in final exile at St. Helena, so this isn't a perfect example. But it demonstrates the power of absence to reset perception and rebuild value. Had he been constantly present and visible after his initial defeat, he never could have returned to power. Absence was necessary for his resurrection. In your own life, you don't need to be exiled to an island to apply this principle. You just need to recognize when you've been oversupplying yourself and consciously pull back. You need to value your own time enough to guard it. You need to respect yourself enough to not be constantly available to everyone for everything. You need to understand that your presence is valuable precisely because it's not infinite and constant. Here's a practical exercise. For the next week, track how available you are. Notice how quickly you respond to messages. Notice how often you say yes to requests. Notice how much of your time is devoted to others versus to yourself. Notice whether you feel appreciated or taken for granted. Then, in the following week, experiment with strategic absence. Don't respond immediately to every message. Say no to at least one request. Create space in your schedule. Guard some time for yourself. See what happens. Notice whether people's appreciation for your time increases. Notice whether you feel more or less stressed. Notice whether relationships improve or decline. Most people who do this experiment discover something surprising: strategic absence actually improves their relationships and their sense of well-being. They're not as depleted. They're not as resentful. People appreciate them more. Their time feels more valuable. And paradoxically, by being less available in general, they're more present and more valuable when they do show up. This is the wisdom of Law 16. It's not about being cold or distant or manipulative. It's about understanding that value comes from scarcity, that presence diminishes over time, and that strategic absence is necessary for maintaining respect and appreciation. It's about valuing yourself enough to not give yourself away constantly. It's about recognizing that you teach people how to treat you based on how you treat yourself. So here's the dark truth at the heart of this law: people will take you for granted if you let them. They won't do it maliciously. They won't even realize they're doing it. It's just human nature. What's constantly available becomes invisible. What's always there becomes background. What costs nothing is valued as nothing. This is painful to accept because we want to believe that being generous and giving will make us loved. And it does, to a point. But beyond that point, it makes us invisible. The solution isn't to become selfish or unavailable. The solution is to value yourself enough that your presence is a gift rather than a given. It's to create a life rich enough that your time is genuinely scarce. It's to set boundaries that communicate self-respect. When you do this, something magical happens. People value you more. They appreciate your time more. They respect your boundaries more. They take you seriously. This brings us to the future, to the question of what you do with this power once you understand it. Because knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. You could use Law 16 manipulatively. You could use it to hurt people. You could use it as a weapon. Or you could use it as a tool for healthy boundaries, self-respect, and balanced relationships. The choice is yours. But the law is operating whether you acknowledge it or not. Scarcity creates value. Presence diminishes it. Absence increases respect. These are facts of human psychology. The only question is whether you'll be conscious of them and use them wisely, or whether you'll remain unconscious and wonder why you feel taken for granted, why people don't appreciate you, why your value seems to decline over time despite your constant giving. So I'll leave you with this question: what would change in your life if you valued your time and presence as much as you value others? What would change if you stopped being constantly available? What would change if you created strategic scarcity around your attention and energy? What would change if you let people miss you occasionally? What would change if you pulled back from relationships that take you for granted and focused on yourself? This isn't about being selfish. This is about recognizing that you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot give authentically when you're depleted and resentful. You cannot maintain value when you oversupply yourself. The paradox is that by being less available, you often become more valuable to others and more satisfied yourself. By creating absence, you create the conditions for genuine appreciation. The truly powerful person understands this balance. They know when to be present and when to withdraw. They know when to give and when to hold back. They know when to be available and when to be scarce. They move through life with intentionality, valuing their own time and energy, setting boundaries that maintain their value. And because of this, they're respected more, appreciated more, and taken seriously more than the person who's constantly available and constantly accommodating. This is Law 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. It's uncomfortable. It challenges our beliefs about generosity and kindness. It seems to contradict what we're taught about being there for people. But it's true nonetheless. Master this law, and you master one of the fundamental dynamics of power and human relationships. Ignore it, and you'll wonder why you're constantly taken for granted despite all you give. The choice is yours.